A scared mail-order bride gets left alone in a snowy town, but a brave Comanche man rides up and says she's coming home with him. And that's how their awesome adventure of trust and love really starts. That's the hook that'll warm your heart in this cool Wild West story, pal. Let's ride along. Mail-order bride was left to die until the lonely Comanche rode up and said, "Coming home with me." Coldwater, Wyoming, winter 1876. Snow drifted in thick, lazy spirals from a sky the color of gunmetal. The wind screamed through the gaps in the boarded windows, carrying with it the smell of woodsum smoke and whiskey from the saloon across the street. The piano there banged out a jaunty tune that could not quite hide the arguments and muffled curses behind its doors. At the edge of the platform, where the train's steam still clung to the air, a lone woman stood. Sarah Ellis clutched a scuffed brownies to her chest. Her wool cloak was worn thin, and the hood barely kept the icy air from needling her cheeks. She shifted her weight from one frozen boot to the other, eyes scanning the street, for a familiar face, one that would not come. She stepped up to the station master's window. "Sir, has Thomas Carson come for me?" Her voice was steady, though her fingers tightened on the handle of her bag. The station master, a man with a sagging mustache and eyes that couldn't hold her gaze, hesitated. He died last week in a stagecoach robbery. His tone was flat, as though reading from a weather report. The words struck harder than the wind. Sarah blinked, her lips parting, but no sound came out. Behind her, boots thudded on the platform. Laughter, low, jeering, rose from a group of men spilling out of the saloon, their steps unsteady, breath hot with liquor. "Looks like the mail-order package finally arrived," one called out, his grin missing teeth. Another leaned against a post, eyes roving over her. "Mail-order trash!" He spat into the snow. Sarah's stomach knotted. She stepped back toward the shadows by the baggage cart, wishing for the sound of her brother's voice, the one that had always made her feel safe. The wind shifted. Hoof beatats, steady, unhurried, echoed down the street. Out of the curtain of snow emerged a tall man, astride a black horse. His hair was bound with a strip of leather, his shoulders broad beneath a worn buckskin coat. His eyes, sharp and dark, swept over the scene. The drunks fell silent under that gaze. The tallest of them took a step back, muttering something to the others. Without a word, they turned and slouched away toward the saloon's dim light. The rider dismounted, boots crunching, in the snow. He stood in front of Sarah, close enough for her to see the faint scar along his jaw. "You'll die out here," he said, his voice low but certain. "Come with me." Sarah hesitated. His skin, his braids, the beads along his coat marked him as Comanche. She had heard the stories, the warnings whispered back east, but in his eyes, steady, unflinching, she saw something achingly familiar. A shadow of her brother's protectiveness. The wind gusted hard enough to shove her a step toward him. He shrugged off his coat, a heavy fur-lined garment, and draped it over her shoulders for the cold. She looked, down at the fabric, then back up at him. Slowly, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, faded handkerchief. She tied it carefully around the handle of her. "For my brother," she murmured, more to herself than to him. His lips twitched, the barest hint of a smile. He led his horse closer, offering his hand. Sarah took it. The warmth of his grip surprised her. She swung up into the saddle, feeling the leather creak under her weight. He mounted behind her, one arm resting loosely near her side, not touching yet shielding her from the wind. The horse stepped forward, hooves muffled in the snow. The saloon's piano faded behind them, swallowed by the sound of the wind and the soft snort of the animal. Moonlight broke through the clouds, painting the white plain in silver. For the first time since stepping off the train, Sarah felt the faintest ember of safety. They rode into the night, leaving Cold Water's lamplight far behind the Comanche village. Later that night, the black horse carried them across the frozen plain until shapes began to form through the flurries. Low, rounded lodges of hide, their surfaces dusted white, smoke curling from the holes at their peaks. Firelight flickered against the snow, glowing like embers scattered across the darkness. They entered the circle of the village, the wind dropping to a low moan as it passed. Behind the ridge, people emerged from the lodges, men in thick buffalo robes, women with braids draped over their shoulders, children peering from behind their mothers' skirts. Whispers rose almost instantly. "White woman brings bad luck." An older voice muttered. Another shook her head. Eyes narrowed. She should not be here. At the center of the gathering stood Maka, the village elder. His face was deeply lined, his dark eyes like flint. He did not raise his voice, yet the weight of his presence quieted those around him. He studied Sarah for a long moment, saying nothing before turning to Chaitan. A sharp exchange in Comanche passed between them, words Sarah could not understand, but the tone was unmistakable. Disapproval. Chaitan did not argue. He simply led the horse toward the far edge of the camp, where the glow of the central fires dimmed. There, a small, empty lodge waited, its flap tied closed. He dismounted and held out a hand to help her down. "You can stay here," he said. He stepped inside and found a small bedroll laid out near a stone fire ring. The hide walls muffled the wind, but the cold clung to the air. Before she could speak, Chaitan disappeared, returning moments later with a small wooden plate holding a piece of warm cornbread. "For you," he said simply, setting it on a low stool near her. Sarah sat, pulling the bread into small bites. She glanced down at her dress, a once serviceable gray wool now torn at the hem. With seams straining from weeks of travel, her fingers found the small sewing kit in her valise. She bent over her lap, working in the dim light from the crackling fire pit. Every few minutes, her eyes flicked toward the shadow at the lodge entrance. Outside, Chaitan was tending to his horse, running a cloth along its flank, checking the hooves, but his gaze often strayed toward the small lodge. When she sat down the bread, she hesitated, then broke off a piece and placed it on the stool by the door flap. "For your kindness," she whispered to the empty space. Later, as the fires in the village began to die down, Sarah heard voices outside. Maka's low, growly tone drifted through the hide walls. "She will bring trouble. The white world always does." "She is alone," Chaitan answered, voice calm but firm. "The snow will kill her." "You put us at risk," Maka said. "Remember your sister?" The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant crackle of a fire. Sarah's hands stilled on her sewing. She pressed her lips together, a knot tightening in her chest. She wanted to believe she would not be turned out into the cold. But the Ellers' words dug deep. Minutes later, a soft sound reached her ears, the faint crunch of snow under boots. She lifted the lodge flap just enough to see a tall shadow standing just beyond the entrance. Chaitan, his arms folded, gaze scanning the darkness beyond the village. He did not look at her. He did not need to. His presence alone, steady and silent, sent warmth through the cold. She let the flap fall closed and lay down on the bedroll, the small piece of cornbread still on the stool, untouched. Outside, the wind rose again, but it no longer sounded quite as harsh. By morning, the village was stirring, smoke curling upward from the center fires. Sarah stepped from her lodge, the cold air nipping at her cheeks, and watched the women kneel by the flames, coaxing sparks into steady heat. One of them handed her a bundle of kindling and motioned to the circle. She crouched down, awkward at first, mimicking the careful stacking of twigs and chips. When her fire caught a thin ribbon of smoke rising into the pale sky, she felt a small swell of pride. That moment was cut short by a familiar voice. Maka stood a few paces away, arms crossed, eyes hard. "White sickness comes from white hands," he said in English, his accent sharp. "Do not bring it here." Sarah froze, unsure how to respond, but before the silence could stretch too long, Shaitan appeared beside her. Without a word to the elder, he took a length of rope from his belt and nodded toward the tethered horses. She followed him, relief, quiet, but tangible. He showed her how to loop the rope around the post, how to knot it so it would hold even if the horse pulled back. His hands moved with deliberate precision, and when she tried, her fingers clumsy in the cold, his larger ones brushed hers to guide the twist. She looked up just for a second and found his gaze already on her. That evening, the hunters returned with news that made the air in the village grow taut. A blade, its hilt marked by a rough engraving, had been found in the snow near the ridge. Chaitin's expression darkened when he examined it. He said nothing to her, but the set of his jaw told her enough. There were men out there, and they were too close. When darkness fell, the villagers gathered near the central fire. Chaitin sat to one side, carving something into a wooden post with his knife. Sarah, sitting a few feet away, began to hum a melody from far to the east, a lullaby her mother used to sing. The words came softly at first, then with more certainty. He listened until the last note faded. "You sing of a place you miss," he said. She stared into the flames. "I'm not sure it exists anymore." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he said, "Freedom is the greatest gift. You should take it, even if it means leaving this place." The weight of his words sank into her chest. She wanted to tell him freedom without him felt empty, but the fear of crossing worlds, of breaking under their weight, held her tongue. The next morning, she stood at the post outside her lodge, a small knife in hand. She carved the shape of a flower into the wood, each line careful, deliberate. "For you," she whispered, tracing the petals. When she returned inside, she found a scrap of tanned leather on her bedroll. The edges were smooth, and in the center her name was carved in neat, sure strokes. "For home," his handwriting seemed to say without sound. By afternoon, her decision was made. The wagon was loaded, her few belongings stowed away. She stood before him in the fading light, the cold breeze lifting a strand of her hair. "I'm going," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He nodded at once. "Then go!" But his eyes betrayed him. There was pain there, as sharp and clear as the wind. She reached into her cloak and pulled out the handkerchief she had carried since her arrival, the one she had tied to her that first night. She pressed it into his hand, closing his fingers around it. "Something to remember me," she said. The wagon driver called to her. She climbed aboard without looking back, afraid she might lose her resolve if she saw his face again. From the ridge at the edge of the camp, Chaitin stood in the last gold. Of the setting sun, the handkerchief caught in his grip. The fabric fluttered in the wind, the faint blue embroidery catching the light. Sarah glanced back once, just before the bend in the trail hid the village from sight. He was still there, unmoving, the horizon stretching behind him like a painted canvas. She knew with a hollow certainty that she was carrying half of herself away. In his hand, the scarf was more than cloth. It was a promise, fragile but unbroken. The city greeted her with gas, lamps and polished streets, the clatter of carriages echoing between rows of brick buildings. Margaret and her husband led her into a grand townhouse with a marble foyer and a chandelier heavy with crystal. Servants took her cloak, offering warm drinks and polite smiles. For a time, Sarah let herself be carried by the rhythm of this world. Soft carpets underfoot, fires that never sputtered out, meals served on fine china. Yet at night, When the house fell silent, she lay awake, beneath embroidered quilts, and felt the weight of the walls pressing in. The air here was thick, unmoving, nothing like the sharp, clean wind that crossed the plains. She missed the sound of horses shifting in the night, the scent of woodsome smoke, the quiet strength of a man who kept watch outside her lodge. She missed the steady, unspoken bond that had taken root between them. One evening, as Margaret chattered about a winter ball, Sarah's hand slipped into her pocket. Her fingers closed around the smooth piece of tanned leather, her name faint beneath the ridges where Chayton's knife had carved it. She held it tight, and a thought took hold. This was not where she belonged. At dawn, she left. She traded her fine cloak for a sturdy riding coat at a livery, saddled a bay mare, and rode out before the city fully woke. The road back to the plains was long, the snow deep, but each mile felt like air filling her lungs again. 2 days into her journey, shadows emerged from the tree-line. A half-dozen riders, their faces hidden. Beneath scarves, the glint of weapons catching the weak sunlight. Her pulse leapt. She recognized one of them from the attack on the village. They gave chase. She urged the mare into a gallop, snow kicking up in plumes behind them. The wind tore at her hair, but her mind was clear. Drawing on what she had learned in the village, she veered toward a narrow pass between 2 ridges, letting the terrain break their formation. When the first rider closed in, she guided the horse toward a drift she knew would give way. The outlaw's mount plunged in, floundering, buying her precious seconds. Another drew alongside, reaching for her reins, but she ducked low, slashing at the air with the small blade Chayton had given her. The man cursed, falling back. By the time she emerged from the pass, the shouts behind her had faded. The mare slowed, sides heaving, steam rising from her flanks. Dusk settled in, the sky bruised with purples and blues. Through the gathering dark, she saw it, a pinprick of orange against the endless white. A fire. His fire. In the village, Chayton sat cross-legged by the flames, the wind tossing sparks into the night. The days since her departure had been long and hollow. Each evening, he lit the fire telling himself it was for warmth, though deep down he knew it was something else. Beside him, the trunk of a cottonwood bore fresh marks, letters carved deep into the bark, her name, for her return. The mare stumbled as they drew, closer, her strength nearly spent. Sarah slid from the saddle, her legs unsteady. The leather scrap was still in her pocket, warm from her grip. "For my way back," she whispered into the cold, pressing it to her chest. Snow crunched under her boots as she pushed forward, the light growing brighter, steadier. Relief swelled in her chest, so strong it brought tears to her eyes. She took one last step, and the world tilted. She crumpled into the snow, the cold rushing up to meet her. But through the blur, she could still see it, the fire, his fire, steady and alive. Her heart leapt toward it, toward him, and then everything went dark. Snow crunched beneath his boots as Chayton rose from the fire. Something had shifted in the night air, a pull at the edge of his senses. His gaze swept across the white plain, and there she was, a dark shape against the snow, stumbling toward him before collapsing. He was running before thought could form, kneeling beside her in the drift. Her cheeks were pale, her lashes dusted with ice, but her chest rose and fell. "Sarah," he said, her name a quiet plea. Her eyelids fluttered, blue eyes finding his. Her lips moved, the words no louder than the wind. "My home is where you are." He gathered her into his arms, feeling the weight of her and the heat beneath her frozen coat. Without hesitation, he carried her toward the village, the firelight growing with each step. The people turned as he passed, whispers threading through the crowd. but no one stopped him. Inside his lodge, he settled her near the hearth, feeding the flames until they roared. He pressed a fur blanket around her shoulders. The scent of wood smoke filled the space, mingling with the steady rhythm of her breathing as it grew stronger. When she could stand again, she stepped outside with him. The villagers had gathered, their faces unreadable in the shifting firelight. Maka came forward, a small torch in hand. He spoke a few words in Comanche, then held the flame toward her. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, its warmth seeping into her fingers. One by one, the villagers touched their torches to hers, the light growing until the whole circle glowed. It was the old ritual, sharing fire as a sign of acceptance. She met Chayton's gaze across the flames and saw the faintest smile break the stern lines of his face. The next morning, they walked together to the cottonwood at the village's edge. Her name was already there, carved deep into the bark. With his knife, he carved his beside it. Their letters touched, entwined in the grain. Later, she knelt in the snow near her lodge, pressing the roots of wild flowers into the frozen earth. The petals would not open until spring, but she smiled at the thought. "For our home," she murmured. Chayton stepped behind her, his shadow falling over the blooms. He wrapped his arms around her, his voice low at her ear. "You're my fire." They stayed like that for a moment. The world hushed around them before he led her to the waiting horses. She swung up into the saddle, and he mounted beside her. Together, they rode beyond the ridge, the wind lifting their hair, the sun melting into a horizon painted gold and crimson. The village faded behind them, but its hum lingered. Voices, laughter, the slow crackle of the central fire. Above, the first stars began to pierce the deepening blue, the moon casting its glow over the plain. The horses' breath rose in white clouds, their hooves drumming a steady rhythm. Under the starlight and firelight, their love felt etched into the land itself, enduring, unshaken, as certain as the path beneath their feet. And though the world beyond might still hold its prejudice and storms, here between them there was only the truth they had chosen. Home was not a place, it was a person, and they had found it. And that, dear listener, is how a mail-order bride left to die in the snow found her way back, not just to safety, but to the only place that ever truly felt like home. In the windswept heart of Wyoming, 1876, Sarah and Chayton built something stronger than the walls of any city mansion or the laws of any land. Love that could weather both winter and the weight of two worlds. If this story stirred something in you, if you could almost hear the wolves beyond the ridge and feel the warmth of that shared fire, then you're exactly where you belong. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales of forbidden romance, untamed courage, and hearts that beat louder than the gunfire. Hit the bell so you never miss the next journey across the frontier, because out here where bullets miss, hearts don't. End of account.